All right, good morning, everyone. It is 9 a.m., so we will go ahead and begin our meeting. We appreciate everyone being with us this morning. I do want to share that we are recording the meeting, so please be mindful of our recording, and hopefully we'll be able to capture that. We do apologize. We had some technical difficulties last week. It seemed like only the first 2 minutes were captured, and so we're going to make sure we keep an eye on that so that it keeps recording the entire time. So if you'll allow me just a moment to share my screen. If I haven't had a chance to meet you yet, my name is Michelle Townley. I'm currently serving as the Acting Chief Academic Officer. So, all right, so we'll go ahead and begin. We want to welcome this morning. We have quite a few additional task force members. As we started last week with our organizational work, we so appreciate everyone that was involved in the first meetings, sending us the names of our teachers, paraprofessionals, and other employees that are represented. We also have a few designees from our school board members. Those names are still coming in. So as we'll probably have a few more people joining us next week. And we also have Miss Fortney will be serving as the alternate board member for Miss Cunningham. So we again thank you all for that. I'd also like to ask, if you don't mind, if you're also a parent to a student in our Polk County Public School System, if you just add to the chat that you're a parent, we also want to note that on our task force member roster as well. So again, welcome everyone. We're glad to have you. So right after we met last Wednesday, on Thursday, the governor's office released a great deal of information about reopening Florida schools and the CARES Act. So we wanted to share some of that with you today. I will send the PowerPoint at the conclusion of the meeting, and I have the link listed at the bottom of this slide. It's a 147 slide presentation, so it's quite lengthy. But our work, we feel like as a task force, really centers around part 2 of the governor's goals, and that's reopening healthy learning environments. Again, with our mitigation strategies, we talked about that a lot last week, as well as responding to a confirmed case, and then our instructional continuity plans. So those are all components that we'll kind of talk about today. But also from the governor's office, we were asked to start thinking about these recommendations for reopening campuses. And step 1 is in June, he announced that camps were open for youth activities. And then in July, we're to expand campus activities for further summer learning instruction. We are currently working on those plans to target a small group of elementary students who typically would have attended our traditional 3rd grade summer reading camps. But that's a collaborative effort that really is in the beginning stages. We're working very quickly with Stephanie and her team to try to help develop an MOU for that, as well as our curriculum team and some host principals on what that might look like to kind of have a mini summer camp, if you will, for some of our 3rd grade readers. And then in August, he did announce that there's an expectation to open up campuses at full capacity for traditional start of the academic year. So that was in the media release that I shared yesterday. And again, the link is here for everyone. And so here, the next few slides are slides that I've captured from the governor's presentation and in partnership with DOE. And so as you can see here, that kind of steps out the expectations from the previous slide, excuse me, to get us to opening campuses in August. So there was a lot of discussion on our call and with the DOE about optimizing in-person learning for students, how to respond to crisis, and preserving in-person education whenever possible. And you move to distance learning only when educationally beneficial or under the guidance of our local health professionals. There was a lot of discussion about what the DOE is essentially calling a new subgroup, and that's our students without internet access. who distance learning became a huge barrier for them. The DOE did mention that unless our local health officials are giving us advice otherwise, that is the expectation for us to open in August, and that if we need additional help in making that happen, they would be happy to partner with us. However, we are hopeful that as a task force, we can help work on some of those mitigation strategies and take care of business. Here are 6 key stages of the day that they want us to think about. Frameworks for schools. We know that each of our campuses are very different. High school is very different from elementary. Some of our smaller schools are very different from our larger schools. Some of our schools face traffic barriers depending on what type of road they're on or what type of sidewalk access that they have. That could all impact many of these elements. So these are areas where we will have to work on, and we'll need training for our teachers. We're thinking on contact day. How can we help support our staff through the promotion of risk reduction, through creating a culture of really teaching all of our staff how to recognize symptoms, how to support students, and how to respond to concerns. And we also need to incorporate lessons for our students about healthy hygiene and self-screening strategies for themselves as well. We also need to make sure we have plans in place for protecting our students and staff that have medical vulnerabilities. We'll talk a minute and possibly about some different work groups that we feel like are needed, but this is going to most likely impact our hospital homebound instructional supports for students. And so this is an area where we do need to recognize that our students and staffs that have these concerns and how can we best support them. Then we get into some general mitigation strategies. These are many of the things we discussed last week, so that was a little affirming that our task force was already heading in the right direction with some of this guidance, and so practicing social distancing, the frequent hand washing. These are also the components that were in our survey to our community and family and employees that came back with positive response. So we'll talk about that in more detail in a minute as well. This particular slide, really, we are living right now with our graduations, as well as our sports and fine arts departments at the high school level have returned to play and returned to performing just this past Monday. And so we do have on the call today Mr. Dan Talbot and Ms. Beth Cummings, who oversee that for the district and been working closely with their athletic directors and their band directors on what that might look like. So many of these pieces that we received from the DOE we're already implementing. Cloth face coverings. So this was a hot topic last week that we were discussing. And so again, we have some more guidance. Also, I want to switch screens here if I may, so bear with me a second. This resource was also shared, and I provided the link in the PowerPoint that we'll share with everyone. But this is a great kind of quick resource from the CDC that really captures social distancing, washing their hands. And so we think this might be something that we can help translate into other languages to help support our students and our families. Sometimes some of the communication is quite cumbersome, and so we want to get that as streamlined as we possibly can. So at this time, let me switch back here and see if we'll take a pause just to check our chat box. So getting some parents, so thank you for sharing that. Stephanie, we need to look at and rework sick leave policies. Yes, we will be talking about those pieces. Oh, you couldn't see the CDC slide? My apologies. Let me try that again. hopefully you're able to see it now. So it's got one of the things that we liked about this was it just had some basic information, very streamlined, nicely done. We know it's good to sometimes have things in a page or less. So this is something we'll be working um, to kind of translate in other languages. So I'm sorry if that is, I don't know what's happening. So my apologies. I will make sure everyone gets that resource as a PDF. So my apologies. Not quite sure what's happening with that. Um, all right. So Mr. Davis is sharing us about concerns with full student body going back all at once with student capacity on the buses. Very concerning for all of us. That later when we get further into about the parent feedback, that is one of the number one concerns about transportation. So we'll get there in just a second. So get back to our slideshow. All right, are we back on the slides? Somebody verify that for me.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you, Kimberly. All right, so so here's, and speaking about the buses where social distancing is not feasible, even at the state level, they are recognizing that our buses are a great concern. And so that's one of their recommendations is to use our face coverings on the buses. We know that from last week, just to kind of recapture a piece for our team members just joining us, Mr. Davis and his team have been wonderful in securing hand sanitizing stations on our buses. And so that will be another element that we're able to provide. But we recognize that that's still a concern to us. That's kids in close proximity to one another. And so that is something that we're concerned about as well. And even though we have those pieces in place for routine cleaning and disinfecting in between every run, and the sanitation stations, it's still something that gives us pause for concern. In talking about class size, you can see kind of the state stance there that we already have constitutionally mandated sizes to be small. However, sometimes, depending on the school, some of those classroom spaces are more restrictive than others. So that's kind of the end of some of the slides I was going to share from the state. Of course, you'll have access to all of the presentation once we share this PowerPoint at the end as well. Another big component from the state call that we have to update is our instructional continuity plan. This is an area where we desperately need our teachers' feedback on. The state is now providing a template that we must follow. So many of the components that were in our ICP that we quickly put together in the spring, fortunately for us, they're already there, but there are also areas that we need to add, and we definitely want to revisit all of our areas. Some of the points that, were kind of done in a quick manner, just in the emergency status. I know one hot topic are grades. That's definitely an area, and student accountability visited, so that in the event that we do have to close schools or close a section of schools, or hopefully not, but if we have to close the whole district again, we are better prepared to pivot to distance learning. So when we talk about work groups, this is a work group that will definitely be needed. And so then just a final update on survey results. Not a whole lot of change from the last time we spoke. The last time we spoke, we were around 32,000 responses. When the survey closed over the weekend, we were up to 37,715. So we had another social media blast. We had some news channels kind of spoke to Mr. Davis and I, and so we were able to capture one last final push for survey results. You can see the majority of our results are from parents, But I want to point out when we have 25,000 or so responses from parents or guardians, that's still only representative of about one-fourth of our student body population. And then employees, we had about 9,500 respond, and we have a little over 13,000 employees. So pretty good response on the employee side. But for parents, of course, we would have liked to see more, but that's actually fairly typical response. We usually get between 20 and 25% on parent surveys. So survey results. Again, this part was fairly consistent with what we discussed last week, but they wanted to share the final results. And we plan on having a public release of the survey results, hopefully by the end of the week from Ms. Pleasant's team. And so we're looking 38% are comfortable with students returning in August, 18% are more comfortable around Labor Day, and then 34% still do not feel comfortable with students returning for the fall semester, and then 10% of our respondents just not certain. So there's a lot of ambiguity right now, and so we recognize their responses as well. And so when we talked about the mitigation strategies last week, these things are favorable for our parents and our employees: the hand sanitizer, temperature checks, sanitizing the building, boxed lunches, students washing and sanitizing hands throughout the day. These things seem to be received very favorably, with very few. Even our comment box was open. We had over 8,000 comments, so that's a little hard to kind of wrangle, but in reading those comments, these were not things that people had questions about, or again, just very supportive. But then we get to our responses within question 2 about areas that were less favorable. So again, same as last week, being comfortable wearing a mask while on campus. We're kind of, spread out with our responses there, with 43% not comfortable. And then riding the school bus. So these are 2 areas on the survey that, really kind of stuck out as areas that are still causing angst for our families. And then we get to our face-to-face learning. 44% prefer face-to-face. 27 would like to continue with their online learning, and then 27% would prefer a hybrid model. And so just wanted to provide an update on summer activities. Again, we're still potentially reopening some facilities in July. Additional student activities will begin in July as well. Mentioned previously that our sports conditioning and fine arts began on Monday. So far, that's going well, and all of our coaches and band directors are adhering to those guidelines, and so we're anxious to hear some of their feedback, as well as a few more days go by. And then Governor DeSantis's office did issue a directive for face-to-face summer learning for elementary age students, so I mentioned that previously as well. And so now I'm going to try to exit from the full screen, and so I can see the chat box. So I know that was a lot of speaking, but really just wanted to provide everyone with the updates on kind of what we received from the state, because that just came out kind of right after we met. And so when we were meeting last time, a lot of our conversation was centered around, do we come back face to face? Will we have a hybrid model? Will we be distance learning? And so now some of those broader parameters of that decision has kind of been made for us. But the real great work that we need to figure out is, what does that look like for Polk County? How do we keep our students and our employees safe? How do we maintain the trust that our families have? We know that many of our families need to get back to work, and that we're a big part of that social support system that they need. And quite honestly, many of us want to get back to at least some sense of normalcy. We know things won't ever probably quite be the same. We've learned things, and we've learned we can get better at many things throughout this time. But that that is kind of where we are at this point in time. So just kind of quickly going through the chat. So we have a question about placing a para with kindergarten teachers because it's some of these social distancing and hand washing protocols are going to be most challenging for our youngest learners. We know that some of the recommendations are different for kids below the age of 2, are different for children under the age of 5. So one of the barriers to having a para placed with every kindergarten teacher is funding. So we are also bracing ourselves for funding cuts. The governor has not yet released our budget, but as the economy has been shut down for months, we do anticipate that will take place. And so I don't know that we can promise, additional paras at this time, but we do recognize that, class sizes are going to be a concern. Mr. Miller is asking, have we looked at data on how the virus impacts different populations? If so, how are we going to manage the risk of each demographic? Yes, we're looking at all that research. I don't know if Dr. Jackson or any of our other health professionals might want to weigh in on that question. Feel free.
Sure, I can say a few words. We know that individuals who are most likely to have a bad complication or problem from COVID tend to be our over 65s and our individuals with chronic health conditions. We also are aware that children seem to either manifest the disease less or are less likely to become infected, which is good in regards to the schools. And but we do know that there's some disparities, particularly racial disparities and outcomes related to COVID. So there's still just an awful lot that is not known about COVID. We're constantly looking at it, but that's really about all I can give you right now.
Thank you, Dr. Jackson. Next question was just about, in regards to the survey, has there been survey for students, data information, and add their concerns? We did hear from some students and encourage them to select the survey box about a community member. That was potentially, I'll own that was an oversight on our part. We were really trying to find out information from our parents and really kind of get a pulse of the adults. We know that our students really, in speaking with them, they understand this at different levels. And some of them have actually sent emails to Superintendent Byrd, myself, and several people. And they're a little bit all over the place, similar to kind of our parents' responses as well. Question from Mr. Martinez for Dan. If we are back in full force, do we have a plan for hands-free ticket options in the fall for athletic events? Great question, Mr. Martinez. Many of those things that we do in the school system, we're going to have to think about. Even our ticketing for sporting events with the exchange of cash and money and touching of that. How do our staff members feel about doing those jobs? Also, many of our front office secretaries will take money for yearbooks, all sorts of things throughout the year, and have to fill out the appropriate monies collected forms. Those are all concerns that we're hearing and trying to think about differently. Ms. Reyes from Purcell is asking, will there be more staff members trained to help with temperature checks in the mornings? Yes, we're going to essentially, based on some of the guidance you may pick up on when you see the entire presentation from the state, we're essentially going to have to train all staff to help. Now, they might not be on temperature checking duties in the morning, but being able to recognize symptoms there teaching students, whether they're supporting a small group, maybe it's someone in the front office that's just greeting a student that's coming to school late. I think we're all going to have to play our part in supporting what do symptoms look like, and being cognizant of that as we're working not only with our students, but quite honestly with some of our fellow staff members too. We know sometimes I know whenever I was in the classroom, it was easier just to keep coming to school than to prep for a sub. So I think we're going to all have to be mindful of that. Are we concerned about the rise of cases in Florida? Absolutely. That's why we have our medical professionals on our team. They're important and integral members. I know Superintendent Byrd and Dr. Jackson speak frequently, and so we definitely lean on their expertise throughout this process. Yeah, so the question about only temperature is going to be considered. No, we have a pre-screening tool that we've been using that has been created in conjunction with some of our health professionals and Audrey Kelly that looks for multiple symptoms. So great question. Their breakdown on how staff feel versus parents in the survey results. Yes, some of what I shared in the slide did kind of break that out, but honestly, the numbers were very similar between students and parents. I mean, excuse me, staff and parents. Ms. Horn Diaz, some of the questions are hard to interpret. Riding the bus, they were uncomfortable. Yes, so that came out. Thank you, Lois, for bringing that up. That came out in many of the comments, so that while student, basically it was, and the majority of the comments were around mask, as we mentioned before. So a parent may have felt comfortable with their student riding the bus, but they didn't want them to wear a mask. So when the question was worded with kind of two qualifiers there, that was an area that did cause some confusion there. So we recognize that and we appreciate that feedback. Ms. Keith is asking, how will clinics in the school be managed? We have some guidance on that. There's essentially guidance for similar when kids go to the doctor. If there's a well waiting room, and then there's a sick waiting room. So there's a kind of a waiting room area that we'll have to do for our clinics to subdivide them out in that manner as well. Essentially, special areas that are reserved for people that may be experiencing COVID symptoms. Ms. Siren is asking, are custodians and employees going to be trained on how to properly clean the building? Yes, they're already doing that, and they've been working on that. And so our little mini summer school, if you will, that I mentioned previously is also going to be a big help in that, actually, in allowing us to be a little more specific with some of our procedures that we have in place, and are they working and are they being as effective as we need them to be? So great question, Jenny. Miss Paige Comer, concerned about the counselor meetings. Yes. So that, I think that Dr. Steinke may be able to address some of that, but so those are some of the areas where we've learned a lot through this experience, and that we may be able to continue to reach out virtually to parents in that meeting format, if that's a preferred method. Because one of the things in the recommendations that we've read over the weekend also really encroach upon us to not have so many visitors into our campuses, as to minimize the risk as much as we can. So that's going to be a different way of thinking, and something that we're going to have to be very clear and transparent about. Some of our parents like to come eat lunch with their child, and some parents, volunteer. And so all of those things are going to have to be looked at in a different lens because of the situation we're finding ourselves in.
Michelle.
Oh, Sarah's got her hand. I'm not seeing her hand raised on my end.
Oh,
So
okay.
sorry,
I'm going to comment real quick on the meetings piece.
please do.
From what I understand, and I've participated in several of them, but from my team, I'm hearing that the go-to meetings that we did, or I don't know if it was go-to meeting, whatever it was called, I forget. That has been very successful with our teams from our schools and stuff during the distance learning period. So I know that they did a lot of those meetings, and it's definitely not for parents to be able to continue to use, and we'll keep using that moving forward, even if we come back fully 100% face-to-face. So IEP participation, will definitely be able to increase with that. Parents found it very valuable. And teachers and staff can participate that way as well. So that was it.
Okay, very good. We also have heard accounts from different teachers that felt like having virtual meetings with parents, especially that might work, and sometimes the times that we have those open houses or PTA meetings or things of that nature maybe weren't conducive to their schedules, but they were able to interact more with some families through different virtual platforms that they may not have used before. So I think those are all positives that we've learned through this experience that just help us to push and grow in our work. Gina's got a great question about sign language interpreters. This is a perfect example of all the different nuances that happen throughout this time and all the different things we have to think about, because you're absolutely right. If someone is hearing impaired and they are relying on reading your facial expressions, wearing a mask could be prohibitive of that. So those are, I think, in some of the guidance where it talks about where feasible is going to be a concern, but then how far can you social distance and still interpret effectively? So great point. We're looking at the risk that the reopening process will amplify those divisions with wealthier schools in our districts via our poorer schools. If so, how are we handling this? Yes, this is something we've been discussing. One of the things we think might happen is that some of our more affluent parents, or some of our parents that have different support structures in their home, may be the ones that explore Polk Virtual School, where because they may have the flexibility in their own jobs to work from home, and so they want to work from home and to keep their kids working from home. And so we're going in those types of situations, we want to encourage families to use Polk Virtual so that the funding from the state for those students remains right here in Polk County. We are working to really we've got to market that better and get that communication out to our families so that they're not looking for other options, but rather staying right here in Polk County with us. So I'm going to turn the screen too, because Superintendent Byrd's here with us. So.
Hey, good morning, everyone. I'm just in the room, so I was listening, and I do want to address that. And I would strongly encourage our families, if they're not comfortable, and we're going to do that. Thanks, Stephanie, reaching out, because we did see where some of our families wanted to go virtual. And one of the things I'm going to say that Michelle is absolutely correct. Polk Virtual is going to give the opportunity. If you go anything else, it reduces the funding for the school district. So Polk Virtual will receive the full funding. If you go to another funding source, it will reduce our funding when we're looking at the FTE. So as you look through that document, there's a lot of different links within there, but it talks about the funding being reduced. So as you all out there speaking to your constituents and in your community, that is one of the things I'd rather us push for Polk Virtual, and we're going to make sure we can get some of our employees on that side to help our students. So I did want to weigh in on that, and thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Byrd.
You're welcome.
Okay, whoops, I think I skipped a question. So Ms. Horn Diaz has a question about in the upcoming weeks, is there a plan? What will happen if someone in a classroom, hallway, or building it tests positive? Yes, we have. We already have a plan in place for that, and so we have protocols that we follow for that procedure. Will an entire group of students or staff members be forced in quarantine for 14 days, and how will that disruption be held? So there are some, again, mitigating questions around that as far as when we start digging into who all has that person been exposed to, who all may have been impacted. But yes, so the update to the instructional continuity plan is going to be crucial in those types of situations, because that is what we anticipate. That it may not be that our entire district has to close, but maybe one particular school or one particular grade level, if we have an outbreak. And so how do we pivot to distance learning in those points? So that's where we're going to need the help from our teacher experts on updating that ICP. So yes, great question. In the case of a hybrid model, how is attendance going to be counted to comply with the amount of school days? That's a question we've been pushing the state for answers and do not have it yet. So that is an area that, the state wants face-to-face. And so that's a question that has not been answered. Typically, if we think about disruption like Lois just mentioned with a 14-day closure, we have mechanisms in place for like when hurricanes happen, where Mrs. Bird has to write to the commissioner about how many instructional hours were missed, what's our plan to make up. You all that are employees kind of know how we have those designated storm days and things of that nature. So there's a protocol in place at the state level for when you have those types of closures. And that, at this point in time, that's still all that we have. We don't have any flexibility from the state for seat time and instructional hours. So looking at the questions. So Stephanie is talking about a more in-depth survey. Yep. So we may need to we were thinking about that as we get a little deeper into what our safety protocols will look like, what our next, the updated instructional continuity plan looks like, and how we might be able to capture specific information from specific families, like Manatee County, we just saw they're doing a register to ride. So if you are comfortable with your student riding the school bus, you go to this link and you register them. So then their transportation department is able to capture, how many people. So we're looking at options like that, but great point. Gina's mentioning about face guards and not regular masks. Yes, we've been exploring some of those options too. And to add to the sign language interpreters, OT and PT, our chorus and drama teachers. They're also groups, and those are great options. Mr. Miller, do we have data on students who did not have access to an online platform? We have some information about students that did not have access. That's one of the challenges we have by not having a common learning management system. In the spring, we would have to look at multiple different programs, so all the different things that we use in the district, and then try to cross-reference those with the students that were performing. So we have some information on that. To Dr. Barrios, likes to kind of help us put all that together, but it's probably, in all honesty, not as accurate as it could be if we had one common platform. So we are working towards having one common platform in the fall. We already are working on that behind the scenes and hope to have some information about that released very soon, so that our teachers can begin to think about utilizing that. It's needed, whether we are in the buildings or whether we have to pivot to distance learning. I think it's needed regardless to help train our students better for the workforce. They're going to have to, upload documents for their boss. They're going to have to do things like that. And so we need to be better prepared to help support them in that endeavor. So Stephanie sharing about a quarter of respondents said they were in high risk category. Yes, those are things we need to capture more specifically on an employee basis. And so, as Mrs. Bird was saying, if we have an increase in students that are enrolled at Polk Virtual, and which brings numbers down at a traditional brick and mortar school, then we would need to look at providing opportunities to those teachers that are over 65 or have underlying medical conditions to go to Polk Virtual first, before we entertained hiring any new staff. So those are all things that we definitely need to do, because we want to honor those employees that, you know, are concerned in that regard. So,
And Michelle, real
yeah,
quick,
go
this
ahead.
is Stephanie. I got a message from somebody on here that says that they can't type into the chat. On the admin side for the meeting, can you make sure that everybody's enabled to type in the chat? I don't know if what that looks like on your end.
I'm not sure. Like I have, like, I've given everybody rights to
Okay.
do that. So I'm not sure what's happening. I apologize for that. So looks like they're not showing that they're turned off on my end.
Okay. Okay.
So not sure. So getting to the back to the questions, how will breakfast be served? Grab and go. It's looking like we'll probably have some form of grab and go. That's going to have to be worked out in an MOU, because it does impact working conditions for our teachers. What does a duty-free lunch look like if we have to grab and go? And so how are we going to work that out? One of the ideas that has I think Stephanie and I were talking about this last week, or maybe it even came up on this call, was if maybe half of the students, you know, if it's let me do an elementary example, then I'll do a secondary example, because lunch in those different worlds are very different. So in an elementary school, if I had, you know, say 6 fourth grade teachers, and 3 of them took their students to the cafeteria and they were socially distanced at cafeteria tables and they were able to have their duty-free lunch, and the other 3 actually did grab and go and went back to the classroom, and then we were able to trade off some days. You know, we want to try to maximize those conditions for work, but also recognize the need to have a safe environment. And when we have those large communal areas, the gymnasium, what does this look like for PE teachers that have gyms? The cafeteria, those are all going to be areas where we have to come together and talk about that. So great question. Yes, Jenny, great point. We know that. So this is some of the areas, I think, where masks become kind of a discussion point, and people, you know, have a lot of feelings about that because of the different things. What, you know, maybe a student is sensitive to different texture components, and something on their face is going to bother them, or you know, there are all sorts of things. Central auditory processing, hard of hearing students, many factors that we have to take into consideration, which means, you know, for some students it might be easy, and for other students we're going to have to really individualize their approach. Yep, we're working on that. We've got to keep our families, we've got to let them know about their options within Polk County. So we are working on that. Just more, Miss Keith, with some more support to face shields as opposed to face coverings or mask. Can one of our doctors, maybe Dr. Hines or Dr. Jackson's, weigh in on the pros and cons between if it's a face shield? Because from what I understand, the face shields kind of have the plastic barrier around the forehead and then the clear, but it actually is open in the chin area. So, and then a face covering is more of a right next to your skin, closer to your nose and mouth. So if one of our medical experts could maybe join in and tell us a little bit about the pros and cons of that piece.
Yeah, I'm happy to weigh in a little bit. The face shield is much better at protecting the eyes in any droplets, getting into the system through the eyes. I don't know that one is superior in regards to protecting the nose entry of virus. I'm not sure about tolerance level for children wearing a face shield versus a mask. The standard for the most part seems to be masks, particularly in middle age and older children. I think that there's just so many different components of this as far as tolerability and whether a child will be adjusting these and touching their face as they adjust. And I don't know that there's a simple answer to it.
Okay. Or for what about if we weren't talking about students, but we were just honing in on staff, and if is the same kind of concept, or so that the children could see the staff members' face more clearly during instruction?
I think for the most part, as far as protection, masks are probably preferred. We tend to use face shields when there are situations, usually with healthcare providers, when there's the potential of aerosolization of secretions into the air where you need to protect, a healthcare provider's eyes. But from the standpoint of communication, if the option is a mask, particularly, your hearing impaired students where they may need to see the facial expression and read lips, obviously I think the shield would be better because you can see through it. I also understand there's actually some masks that have a clear covering on the front of it. And having options, I think, would be good.
Okay, thank you so much. Also so there's some couple questions in the chat about Head Start, and that's going to be just a challenging area. Our Head Start and pre-K students, I think it's harder sometimes for younger students to really understand what all's going on. I can recall reading the book about your personal space camp and your your bubble that you live in to try to help teach kids under normal circumstances that it's not necessarily okay for me to come ask you a question like this, but that and brushing their teeth and some of the things that are required in Head Start will have to look different. So yes, thank you for bringing that up. Also, and just another piece about how we respond to crisis and protocols. Yes, that is actually one of our requirements in the plan from the governor, is to have a crisis response team that's different from really just kind of focusing in on the pandemic response. So we have those teams for hurricanes, for other crisis type situations with students and different trainings. So yes, all important. Will e-learning curriculum run concurrent with daily curriculum if we must shut down if a student is out sick? We're still working on that process. As we have a learning management system, more of our curriculum resources will live in one place, and our capacity to build that will be better. Yep, same. And Miss Sumner, who's our principal on the team, that is a principal at Gene Odell Learning Center, which takes care of some of our most fragile students. Some of the same things we were just discussing about pre-K are also very relevant for our IND students and the teachers and paraprofessionals that serve those classrooms. Yep, Shane, we're seeing that there is a lot of talk in the media and, questioning, things all the time. And so it is hard to do that when our students may come from a home that is sharing things that may be different than what we're trying to support at school. And so, how we address that and where we can support that through training. I think some of the training videos and supports that we're going to need to do for students are going to have to be repeated. And so it won't just be, the first week of school and then we're finished. We're going to have to keep that, at the forefront so that we can get in front of those things. I think based on what we've heard and learned so far, that those types of questioning mentalities is gearing mostly around face mask. So Miss Cummings is sharing that face to face. Is that correct? Yes, Miss Cummings, I think that we are going to have to think more about our safety protocols and our instructional continuity plans and when students return face to face. But again, providing that Polk virtual option for families that aren't comfortable, so that we keep the funding. But last week, and this came up on yesterday in the board meeting, so just to clarify, last week when we talked about the three options, whether it was traditional or the hybrid, that kind of just gave an example of A and B days, and then the total e-learning. I think whenever there were some sharings of that story on the news, they just put one segment when I was talking about hybrid, and they didn't talk about the choice 1 and choice 3. So all of you that are on the call kind of knew that whole context of that conversation. And 2 days a week was just an example. It might have been 2 weeks out of it. That was just to show really the intent of the hybrid model is to kind of have only 50% of your students in the building at a time. Yeah, and so students were still getting that instruction. So just thought that might be a good time to clarify that. If students and families cannot afford or find face masks or shields, will the district be able to provide them? We're trying to acquire as many as we possibly can, just like all the other districts and employers all across the world, really. So we're buying as many as we can for our students and our employees. So how will paras be able to help in the classroom, especially resources that require one-on-one help? Again, that's where I think our face mask, our hygiene protocols, they're all going to have to be taken into account as best as we possibly can. Is there a timeline on when we need to make decisions on how we open schools? Building administrators need time to adjust. Yes. So previously we had said, we had hoped to make an announcement in July. Part of the announcement really has kind of been made for us. So now we just really need to get that message out about the safety protocols that are in place, and then work on the Polk virtual version, or Polk virtual support, and then work with our CDC and our health department to see where we are in Polk. Just like that Friday afternoon on March the 13th, when we were in a conference call with our principals, thinking we were still gonna come back to school on that Monday, and then the governor announced, 10 minutes after that call that we were closing. So we have to be flexible, and so we're making these plans, but we may, we're gonna lean on our health department and our local context of what's happening. We don't really know what might be happening come August. So I think sharing those plans will be important.
So Michelle,
Go ahead.
can I interject something real quick? Because I know based on our time, we're starting to come to an end, at least for today. I think that by the time we leave here today, we need to make a decision on really which way we're going. I mean, the governor's kind of made our decision, even though he says it's a local decision. It's really not, because they are pushing for face-to-face. And so I think we need to have a solid understanding of where we're going, where we are looking to open brick and mortar in August, but having the Polk virtual option. And we really need to start aggressively pairing staff that need to go to virtual, and getting to families that this is an option. And I think that as we move forward, we need to start looking in committees, because I don't think 1 hour once a week is gonna do it. We're gonna have to break into committees and focus groups. So I liked the focus group idea yesterday, so that we can start coming back to these meetings, doing updates from committees, and really getting this thing going. Because what I've heard from staff and even from parents in the community, is that they want to know sooner rather than later, so that we can all start to prepare. So I think if we have something to really release right after the 4th of July holiday, which means we're going to have to really work our tails off, The sooner that people can know and wrap their heads around what their options are, the better we're gonna be off.
Mhm. Yeah, so that's our goal, is kind of right after July 4th. And so that kind of transitions us into the next piece. We know we need two potential work groups, one around instruction and one around health and safety protocols. So what we were going to ask for as we kind of close out today is, we're kind of thinking our instructional personnel need to lean towards the instructional work group, with a couple of people also on the health and safety protocol team to kind of provide that school-based perspective. But then obviously our pediatricians, our doctors, our team over, in our own school-based health and wellness, HR, risk management, they need to be helping with the health and safety protocols. So my plan was to kind of come up with a draft of how we might break people into groups. If you have a strong feeling about one particular area that you would prefer to serve in, you can feel free to put that in the chat or email me back on the email I sent you. If you just want to respond and say, hey, Michelle, I really want to be on health and safety. If you'll send me that by the end of the day today, then my plan is to work on that. And then I've already taken some of the slides from the 147 slide document from the state and broke them out into those two subgroups. So which slides kind of give us direction on the instruction and the update to the ICP, and which slides give us guidance around health and safety. And so once we break into those groups, we'll have a lead that's, a team leader that'll gear those two committees up. And then I'll share those slides with everyone. So they've already kind of been broken apart. So that's really where we need to go. And that was kind of the plan. And then hopefully, if those groups have time to at least begin thinking about how they might approach the task before next week. And then my thought was, for next Wednesday at our regularly scheduled time, we might just briefly kick off about 10 minutes to come together, and then let the time stand for the work groups to get started. And then, of course, if the group would prefer to get a little more time in, that's your choice. But we're kind of getting to the point where we need to get these work groups going so that we can better share with all of our stakeholders, how our plan. And so that was kind of how we were going to conclude today. And so great discussion. Let me circle back. Yes, we know that so teachers were very concerned when they heard about the hybrid model on Bay News 9 and got a lot of emails. So I understand that. We're concerned about that as well. Because that would mean, yes, teachers are trying to balance the face-to-face learning and the online, and that would be incredibly challenging. That is one of the drawbacks of the hybrid model, is kind of that approach. So, but being ready to pivot to distance learning, and I think our teachers, were, the ultimate professionals and learned a lot in the last quarter of the year. They'll be better prepared if we do have to close schools as well. I think one question I missed was, how are we handling students who are not on grade level next year? The COVID slide, yes, we're very, very well aware of that. One of the things we've already shared with principals was a kind of common extended learning plan during particular strategic times throughout the school year that would provide our students with extra time for tutoring, but also they took breaks strategically to allow for our teachers and our students to kind of rejuvenate. We know if we put out extended learning everyday tutoring for the whole school year, it'll burn out our teachers, it'll burn out our students. So trying to think strategically about when we might be able to do that and put timeframes out for principals. That's already been done as principals are working on their budgets and their Title I plans. They know those timeframe structures. Another thing we're trying to capture in those timeframes are, in the event we might be reimbursed for anything, there's been some talk about certain reimbursements through FEMA, through being able to use certain funds through the CARES Act. We can capture those timeframes through payroll processes that allow for more clean capture of the information. So not that it's necessarily all about the money, but we know the money's going to be tight. It's more about teacher and student ability to kind of be focused during those tutoring times and then have time for rest. So great question, Dr. Miller. Try to check the chat. So, okay, so Shane's saying he doesn't know the vision or the focus groups cannot work if we don't know which plan. Yeah, so that's, you know, that's part of our work. I think when you see the slides from those particular areas, those two different works, the instructional continuity plan is very spelled out. You will have section 1 and it'll have A, B, C, and D. And so taking that plan with our current instructional continuity plan, where do we have gaps? Where do we need to tweak and add more information? Those are there. Also with the health and safety protocols, those slides give guidance, and then we already have some things that we've been working on. So I think coupling those two together, and then the end expectation will ultimately be for the instructional group to come out with an updated instructional continuity plan. For the health and safety protocol group, we already have some protocols around if we have a positive case, what do we do? But providing a framework for schools to think about. I don't think we're going to have all the answers for schools. We're going to have to allow school-based committees to do some of that work, but certain recommendations like arrival, what does that look like? Temperature checks, the pre-screening for symptoms, we have those pieces in place. So I think as we break into groups, as we share that, we'll formalize some of that a little more clearly. So hopefully that answers that question. So does that help, Chris, Stephanie?
I think you stated that.
Not really?
No, that's what you stated earlier. This is what we're looking at.
I mean, I really kind of echo what and Shane is Chris. So
Oh,
if I
okay, I'm sorry.
Chris, sorry, he goes by Chris. So if he anyway. So I think what Chris and Lois and others are trying to say is that I think before we leave today, that this task force needs a clear path forward. Like, is hybrid off the table? Because hybrid safety and health protocols are going to look different than full open health and safety protocols. You know what? So I think we need, as a group, to either vote or decide that you know, are we going to look at hybrid, or are we ditching hybrid to go full open with the option for our staff that are in high risk categories and our students that may not want to be in high risk categories, having full virtual or hospital down options. And so I think if we can decide that today, moving forward, the instructional work group and the health and safety protocols work group will have a clearer way forward.
Okay, yep, thank you for that feedback. And so, yes, I'm sorry if that wasn't clear earlier. It's either full open or Polk virtual. We have not been given any flexibility from the state for the hybrid model. Like when we were talking about instructional hours, we can't do the hybrid model because we've not been given that flexibility. So yes, I'm sorry if I didn't understand that clearly the first time. Those are our choices. We're building an instructional continuity plan around full open in August. Polk virtual is Polk virtual. And the instructional continuity plan would be, in the event we have an outbreak and have to close, here's what we will do, not around a hybrid model. Same for the health and safety protocols team. Here's what we will do for basic. I think if we went back to that slide I showed earlier in the meeting about the 6-step approach, like what do you do when kids arrive? What do you do during class? That is what we need that team working on for full open in August. And then the other procedures, which many of them we already have completed with our health experts and the people that truly are experts in that field, with health, human resources, risk management. What do we do when we have a positive case? Those things are already firmed up. So that is where we need to focus our efforts. Full open in August, the instructional continuity plan in place, and then full open in August. And what do those health and safety protocols look like for students and staff throughout the school day?
And guys, one of the reasons, remember when I came on early is why I said, one of the reasons when I came on early is why I said push everybody for full virtual. That's why, because to try to get to hybrid, we get it. It's a lot of work going in and out. However, we're going to keep a plan on the side in case there is another closure. So we're actually working on something else in case. That's what Michelle is saying. She's working on that plan as well. But looking at the full virtuals where we're trying to push everybody to in the event that they are not comfortable coming back. So keep in mind, we're actually looking at social distancing. I can tell you that I've been with finance and with facilities looking at what type dividers do we have for any of our desks or any workspace that we have. So we're looking at all of that as well. So just so you know that the problem is everybody's trying to get the same items is what we're looking at. That's what we're running into the roadblocks now. So I kind of wanted to make sure we were all okay as you all go off to work. And again, I want to say thank you to you all for joining us on this task. It's not easy, it's new, and something that we never thought we would have to be embarking on at all.
So I think Kyla had her hand up. Kyla, do you want to unmute and?
Yes. Okay, so I heard Stephanie also mention the high risk, so because we do have some high risk employees, and that's a concern, in this situation, because some people can just catch a lot much faster or get much sicker, and I just wanted to make sure that that's part of the plan with the health and safety.
Sure. Yeah, that's where we were talking, like those are the employees that would be given priority for Polk Virtual. And as much as we can, shift those units there. Another question that was in the chat was, will the learning management system make a difference in deciding the option? Not really. It's just a support tool. We don't get that flexibility for that. Larry, were you raising your hand? I can't hear you if you're unmuting.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir. I wasn't sure if you were waving your hand or just touching your head.
No, I just wanted to make sure that they understand that some of the employees I represent are not classroom-based employees, and that if they're in one of them high-risk categories, what options are we going to do for them too? I know we're basically worried about getting the kids educated, which should be our first priority, but we need to take care of them employees too, to make sure that they have something to do if they end up in one of them categories. But that's all. I just wanted to bring it up and let everybody know that.
That's kind of what I was saying, not just the teachers, but we have school counselors and others.
Thank you, Larry. And I think, we have one of our HR people on the line. I know there's some different types of support that we've been working through with Ms. King and Ms. Porteous, and so I'm sure those elements will come into play at certain times. Class size for electives, yes, we know that that's a concern. Ms. Cummings, that's another area where we've asked the state for some more leniency, especially in elementary school. We have a 150-minute per week requirement for physical education. That's one of our largest classes. If we could get some leniency on that, that would allow us to have smaller groups and we could build out different rotations for students. All of those types of decisions around that, even with electives, are really driven by seat time and those requirements that the state has not made a change with. So that's kind of where we are with that. Answer a few more questions in the chat, and then I think we'll probably have to wrap it up for the day. If anyone does need to sign off, we certainly understand, but I do want to try to answer as many of these questions as we possibly can. Yep, I think Dr. Miller is bringing up again just about all of our different types of workers, our school bus drivers, our guardians, our food service workers. We recognize that every single employee group has employees over 65, has employees with underlying health conditions. If you all recall, around spring break time when we went into this mode, We did have a survey to try to capture some of that information. We're trying to work with those employees that have already reached out to Linda King's office. And some of it, you know, we have to be mindful of HIPAA, and we work with them on a case-by-case basis. But I just want to recognize those questions and honor those questions, that those are all things that are being dealt with. You know, I'm typically dealing with things on the instructional side, but I'm aware that those are all things that Ms. King and Ms. Porteous and their respective teams are working through, and it's uncharted territory for them as well. Is it their legal right to say they don't want to come back because of health reasons, or do they have to forfeit their jobs? I'm not 100% sure. I do know that there are some things that do require a medical confirmation of a condition. And so having that appropriate paperwork and appropriate documentation is going to be required, or I would assume that an employee is going to have to come back to work.
Well, and I think, Michelle, like there's provisions in the CARES Act too right now that have different
different
health and
FMLA
aid.
types. Yeah.
Yeah, and so extended FMLAs, and you know that might be something that we need to talk about at the table, along with updating sick leave policies. Is developing a new maybe leave of absence for COVID if they can't do virtual for whatever reason, or whatever, we can't find something meaningful for them to do in their job. Having different leaves of absences available to them too, so that they still have employment in some capacity. So those are things that we'll have to negotiate and talk about at the bargaining table too.
Sure. Lots of work to be done, and there's so many different components, so many different moving parts, and so I think, like I said, our next step is, if you have a particular committee that you would rather serve on, let me know. If you're comfortable with, if you kind of are, a teacher or an instructional support person or paraprofessional, we're going to gear you kind of towards the instructional side, although we will need some of those people on the health and safety side, like I said. But if you have a preference, if you have, please email me, let me know. We're getting that draft together, getting it sent over. And so we'll work with that and those slides that we talked about, and then identifying leads for those work groups. So that'll be our plan for next week. We'll kind of just come on the call quickly, and then I'll build 2 separate team meeting logins for the different workforces, and we'll go from there. So again, we thank you for your time today. We appreciate all the people that are given their time and given their expertise and sharing their thoughts, so that we can make this as best as we possibly can for our students and our staff and our families. Challenging times, these are certainly things that we haven't been trained for, because they're new to everyone, literally in every field. As you all may very well know by different family members and friends you have that work in different areas, they're all being impacted by COVID-19. And so we'll get through this together. I'm confident that we have very smart people at the table with us. We had a great meeting last week. It was our intent all along to add more people. And so we're thankful for the people that those original task force members, they shared. And so thank you for your time this morning. Along those lines, if you think you might be interested in maybe chairing one of those subcommittees, or even serving as a note taker or something of that sort, please let us know. I don't want to be the talking head on this thing every single time. It's about all the work that we're all doing. So thanks again. I look forward to hearing from you guys, and we'll see you all again next week.